All right, welcome to the Tennessean. I'm Dwayne Gang, an editor here at the Tennessean, and we're joined by Senator Bob Corker to talk about a wide range of issues. So, Senator, welcome to the Tennessean.
Dwayne, good to be here. Thank you.
Let's start off with what's kind of big in the news right now, and that's the Iran deal. Explain to us your background on it and why you've come to the conclusion that you don't think it's a good deal.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think, it took tremendous amount of effort to even get Congress to have the ability to weigh in on this deal. It's an executive agreement. The president went straight to the UN Security Council, as you know. But Congress played a big role in getting Iran to the table by passing 4 tranches of congressionally mandated sanctions against Iran. And so because of that, I think, on behalf of you and the people here in Middle Tennessee and people all across our country, it's appropriate that Congress have a voice in this. And as you know, we were able to pass a bill. It was my bill with Senator Cardin from Maryland to give us that opportunity. So now we're in that review process, a 60-day review process. And when we get back in September, we will be debating on the floor and people will be making a decision as to whether they think this is a good agreement for our nation. I want to go back to what the president's stated goal was, and that was to dismantle Iran's nuclear program, which, by the way, it was a goal that I supported. I think most people in America probably supported that. I am very discouraged by the agreement that was produced. It does anything but dismantle their program. As a matter of fact, what it does is, with American approval, it allows them to industrialize their nuclear program, which is it's almost unfathomable to me that we began with the goal of dismantling, and we've ended up in the place that we are right now. So obviously, I don't think that is in our nation's interest. Iran is not actually adhered to any of the UN Security Council resolutions that have been put in place relative to their nuclear program. And the fact that we've had this rogue nation with a boot on its neck, and it has been able to negotiate with, Great Britain, France, Germany, Russia, China, and us, 6 pretty important countries, and end up in the place that they are, to me is very concerning. Iran is the #1 exporter of terrorism in the world. I mean, that's not a debatable statement. They are. We have 3 countries that we have named state sponsors of terror. One is Sudan, one is Syria, and the other is Iran. And Iran causes the other 2 to pale in comparison. Right now, there's a lot of leverage, but in 9 months per this deal, we're going to be releasing anywhere from $100 to $150 billion to Iran, which will cause them to be even more dominant in the region. We're releasing the economic sanctions that brought them to the table, so their economy will be growing. And somehow or another, which again is unbelievable to me, we have agreed to a nuclear program being industrialized. We've agreed to continued research and development. Right now they're operating, Dwayne, very primitive centrifuges. They're called IR-1s. They have IR-2s, IR-4s, IR-6s, IR-8s, and we as a nation, if this agreement is approved, we are agreeing to them continuing that research and development. The inspections process is deeply flawed. The focus on their previous military dimensions, which we know they were developing a nuclear weapon. That's not debatable either. And yet we're not really causing them to come clean and share with us how far along they were. So look, I'm sorry. My vote and the vote of many of our colleagues, which by the way is bipartisan. I mean, this is the only thing thus far that's bipartisan about the deal that's been reached is bipartisan opposition. And my sense is the administration will be successful in getting enough members to overcome a veto. It looks like they're moving in that direction, but I think it's certainly the question one has to ask themselves, Dwayne, is do I believe as a senator that this deal, if Iran wants to get a nuclear weapon, will keep them from getting it? And the answer is no. I mean, I think in many ways it paves the way. Secondarily, Dwayne, there is no articulated policy by this administration in the Middle East. I mean, again, when I talk to my friends on the other side of the aisle, and many of them are calling me daily right now as they're trying to make up their mind, the administration is, lobbying them heavily. I understand from certain parties, even threatening primaries and everything else if they go against the administration. And so they're calling me saying, hey, Corker, what concerns me is not just this agreement, but the fact that we don't have a Middle East policy. And this Iran nuclear agreement could end up de facto becoming our Middle East policy. We're not pushing back against them with Hezbollah. We're not pushing back against them with Hamas. We're not really pushing back against them with the Houthis in Yemen. And, unbelievably, I was at Fort Campbell yesterday and had this same conversation, but we're not pushing back against Assad right now, which has, killed 240,000 of his own citizens. As we sit here today, he's torturing people with Iran's backing, torturing people right now in prisons. And, it just speaks to the fact that this Iran agreement has really kept us from having any kind of Middle East policy to push back. But importantly, what's going to happen is, again, all the leverage will shift to them. What's going to happen, and this has, by the way, been a subject of contention on both sides of the aisle and much questioning, is the way, because this is an executive agreement, I think because of the way the president chose to pursue this, it's not binding on the next president. Okay? On the other hand, the troubling part is in 9 months, we've lost all our leverage, all of it. And what Iran is going to be able to do in 9 months is say, well, look, if you push back against what we're doing on human rights, if you push back against what we're doing on terrorism, if you, by the way, decide that you're going to intrusively inspect our military facilities, all they've got to do is say, look, if you're going to do that, we're just going to resume our activity. So I don't know how we could have ended up being in the place that we're in. We're not dismantling their program, we're approving it. And I'm very discouraged, and as you can tell, I don't think it's good for our nation. I don't think it's good for the Middle East. I don't think it's good for the world. It certainly is not good relative to overall nuclear proliferation, and I don't support it.
So what do you think needs to happen, knowing everything that's on the table right now? What would you prefer to see happen in the coming months or years?
Well, look, the question that, it's interesting. I have one of the dilemmas that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have is that the White House is calling them and saying, well, we've agreed to this though with other countries, and we're in a dilemma now, and if you guys turn it down, if you follow that line of thinking, it's basically negating Congress's ability to vote on whether they think this is good for the country, right? I mean, basically they're saying, look, we agreed to this agreement, so therefore you cannot keep us from implementing. Well, I don't know. I mean, there's a balance of power issue. The other countries knew full well that Congress was going to weigh in. Believe me, they knew full well. They've been in my offices nonstop, or let me say this, a great deal, trying to encourage me to support this. So everyone has known from day one that Congress was going to vote on this. And to say that, but we've agreed to this with other countries negates what Congress has done hundreds of times in the past and said, look, we do not believe that, this is something that is in our country's interest. So what I want them to do is to go back and negotiate a much stronger deal that doesn't, approve of the industrialization of the program, doesn't alleviate all of our leverage, has full integrity in inspections, forces Iran to come clean on their previous military dimensions. Now, is that going to happen? No. I mean, it looks to me like that the administration has been successful in garnering the kind of support that they're going to need to keep a veto from being overrode. We'll see. Overridden. We'll see. I hope that's not the case, but at the end of the day, it appears to me that with the people who recently have signed on, it's going to be very difficult to have enough disapproval, even though it's going to be bipartisan, meaning that people on both sides of the aisle have issues with this. I read a great editorial this morning, and I'll just mention in a national publication. And one of the things the president hasn't done is he hasn't engaged with any of the critics. I mean, what they basically do is slam you personally if you disagree. You saw what they did with Chuck Schumer, who, by the way, is going to be the leader of the, Democratic Senate leader, Democratic side leadership. After this, he's right now, basically the person everyone looks to anyway on the Democratic side, and they basically, villainized the guy. I mean, they really did when he didn't support. They didn't do it so much with Menendez, but what they need to do instead, and this is one of the frustrations I've had with them, is they won't answer questions about the integrity of this deal. Instead, they basically say if you don't support this, then you're for something else. So the fact is, I just think we've been out-negotiated. I've shared that with Secretary Kerry. I was especially disappointed with the last round. We just totally punted on the inspections piece. We did not end up doing what we said we would do. We punted on the PMD piece, and I know that y'all have seen AP stories relative to documents that have come out relative to the inspections process in Parcheen. I can't speak to that because they tell us these things in classified settings, which is done purposely in many cases to keep me from being able to talk public about it, but you've been able to read about it. But then for good measure, we lifted the conventional weapons ban against them in 5 years. Where did that come from? It has nothing to do with the nuclear file, which, by the way, they said was the sole purpose of these negotiations was a nuclear file. Why did we lift the ballistic missile ban in 8 years? And by the way, for good measure, why did we throw in lifting immediately missile testing now? It's almost as if our nation punted in this last round. If you could get beyond the fact that we have this agreement approves, a rogue nation, terrorist nation, approves of the industrialization of their program. If you can get beyond that, and then you begin looking at these qualitative issues, it's difficult for me to understand why we agreed to some of the processes that we agreed to here at the end. I will say the motivations are tough. Look, China wants to buy their oil, Russia wants to sell them arms. My European friends, European friends, they're in Tehran hotels now. They want to do business with them. I know the administration feels like they haven't had any foreign policy successes since they've been there, and this was a legacy item. So you had a lot of motivation to end up with an agreement. I just think it's one that all of us will own, right? Do I believe that this is going to keep them from getting a nuclear weapon if they want it? I don't.
Was Kerry able to address any of your questions?
No, this is what I was kind of hard on him in the opening hearing. I realized, but I'd been with him the night before, and they take us down to the SCIF. This is with all major agreements like this. We go down into a classified setting, and I would say there were 75 or 80 senators who came. They typically happen at 5 in the afternoon, and every time Kerry had a question, by the way, from either side of the aisle, basically he'd bat it away and say, well, you either support this deal or you're for war. Well, nobody believes this administration is going to get involved in war. That's such a ridiculous. We know for a fact the Iranians don't believe it, and candidly, that probably led to, some weakness in the position. I'm not for that. I'm not for war. Don't get me wrong. I think there's lots of options way prior to anything like that happening. But that was kind of their response. That look, if you question what we did, you must be for war. And what it does is it just shuts down any discussion about some of the fallacies in the agreement, which obviously was a purpose. And then now what they're doing is if you disagree, then they're going after you personally. They just haven't engaged on some of these frailties. I know they cannot feel that they achieved a negotiation. Obviously, all sides have to agree. I understand that. But I don't see how they can feel like they really, if you will, got any kind of upper hand in this negotiation.
How active are you in trying to get or convince your colleagues to vote no?
That's a great question. So we've had, Dwayne, 13 hearings and or briefings. You know, it's 6 of them during June to cause members of our committee to understand technical issues. I mean, we had people from Oak Ridge National Lab up and others that are involved in nuclear issues to understand, first of all, you know, what are the important technicalities in a deal. We had 7 hearings, briefings since that time, since the deal was announced. And I felt like, number one, my role as chairman of the committee was to make sure everybody in a fair way understood the deal. And we've had people from all persuasions in. I mean, we had people who support it, people who oppose it, we've had scientists, we've had physicists, we've had all kinds of people in. I don't really look at this, Dwayne, as an issue that you lobby on. This is a vote of conscience. It's a vote that is going to be one of the most, quote, considered votes that people make. And so my role, I don't view as calling up Dwayne Gang and saying, hey, Dwayne, I hope you're with me on this. That's not, my role is to answer questions. And so what's been happening, and I was on the phone a great part of the day yesterday when not in meetings, was to take questions from moderate Democrats who are struggling. They're on the bubble, and I talked to a guy on another continent yesterday who is doing his foreign relations work. But to answer the questions and for them to say, hey, this is what the administration's saying, what do you think? So that's been more my role, not a role of trying to line up 67 votes.
When a moderate Democratic senator calls you up, what are they asking you?
They are the biggest focus that most of them have is their concern that there's no regional strategy and that this deal ends up being the de facto strategy in the region where everything ends up being centered around what Iran is doing. And what that does, as you know, is empower Iran greatly. And so they, in many cases, are talking to the administration about, hey, is there not something that you guys can announce or articulate relative to pushing back on this newfound power that Iran is going to have in the region? It's going to be substantial. I mean, they keep saying, well, it's just $100 to $150 billion, but in the Middle East, as one incredibly intelligent foreign policy person said to me yesterday, $1 billion matters in the Middle East. And if you look at Iran's economy, it's $406 billion. That's their gross domestic product. So if you think about them getting, just say the low side of that number, $100 billion, that's a 25% increase in the amount of money available to them to, by the way, export terrorism and do other things. I know they're going to use some of that inside their country, but let's face it, a big part of what they've been doing in the Middle East is exporting terrorism. You look at our country with an $18 trillion GDP, if all of a sudden you were to add $4 trillion in the next 9 months to the United States, are there things that we might do with that? Yes. So I think that has been so many of them have the concern that the aftermath of this is that we end up with no Middle Eastern policy. This becomes the de facto policy. And look, they're also concerned about the fact that I mean, you start out, and seriously, I mean, if you look at the research and development components, you look at the other things that are being freed up, many of them are realizing that in years 5 to year 7, all of a sudden, we're in a place that's very uncomfortable with Iran. So it's the weakness in the deal over time combined with the regional pieces.
We had a reader kind of ask similar questions as well. Like, this is from Frank Gregg in Gallatin. Is like, why can't Congress do its job to stop this unless the president gets something in return? So what kind of what does the United States need in return, or what would a stronger deal, in your view, look like?
Yeah, so I think what you're going to see, well, first of all, a stronger deal would have dismantled their program, and that's not what we're doing. And I think that, again, we're crossing the Rubicon with let's face it, I mean, basically Iran, by defying international norms, is going to end up being successful. What does that do relative to future nonproliferation efforts? I think it's pretty devastating. And by the way, what do people in the region do that are mortal enemies of Iran? they're going to watch over time, and if they don't see significant pushback by us and others, they're going to look at this and say, hey, in order to make sure we have appropriate balance of power here, we're going to buy some of this off the shelf from other countries that are willing to export nuclear technology. I don't think that's going to happen immediately. But, you know, what Congress will do, I think, well, first of all, I'm just being honest. I'm not, whenever I've been in here, I've been very direct. I do think it's going to be very difficult for Congress to keep this from happening. So this agreement likely will go into play, unfortunately. I think what Congress will do is come back around with some very, very strong provisions relative to Iran, but also probably some very strong provisions relative to some a regional strategy that is very supportive of allies that we have in the region. And I don't want to get too specific about that right now. I think the first step is to have this vote that's going to take place, but I'm almost certain we're going to circle back around with with additional policy moves through Congress.
Right. Any other questions on this before we maybe go to another? Yeah.
You kind of talked about this a little bit, sir, but why would the administration want to pass a deal that doesn't stop proliferation, that essentially, as you're saying, doesn't accomplish any of the things that they wanted to accomplish in the first place? Why would they not only agree to this, but lobby it and apparently get enough senators to buy in to prevent nuclear war?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Fordo was going to be closed. That was one of their red lines. Fordo is going to stay open now. ARAK, A-R-A-K, is a plutonium facility. It was not going to produce plutonium anymore. ARAK is going to stay open, and it's going to produce plutonium. We were going to have anywhere, anytime inspections. Now it's a 24-day wait. By the way, people are even confused by that. That's a 24-day wait after the IAEA has to say that they have concerns about a facility. Iran responds to that. The IAEA, by the way, has to tell them, share with them what information it is that they have that causes them to be concerned. So Iran actually knows what it is they're looking for. And then, by the way, then the 24-day period starts. And by the way, what does that also mean? Interestingly, the IAEA just has no intelligence. I'm talking about like not brain power intelligence, but intelligence as to what's doing. They rely on other countries. Well, other countries, it's the same problem we had with the INF Treaty in Russia. Okay, we knew they violated it, but we wouldn't counter them. We wouldn't share it because we didn't want our intelligence sources to be outed, right? Well, in Iran, the same thing is going to happen where, our intelligence, we're not going to want to say how we know that Iran is violating because then you're outing, they know whether it's human intelligence, or whether it's SIGINT, signals technology, we're listening to what the scientists are saying to each other, or whether it's satellite, we have to, so we're kind of giving them the information as to what, so it's not anytime, anywhere inspections, and it's incredibly cumbersome. By the way, we said 100% clean on previous military dimensions. No, sorry, that's not what's happening. This is one that really has upset many, many people, and that is, and me being included, of course, is that the IAEA has to produce a report about their previous military dimensions. It doesn't matter what the report says. It doesn't matter whether Iran comes 100% clean or whether they become 1% clean. They just make one scientist available to us. Regardless of the qualitative aspects of the IAEA's report on previous military dimensions, the sanctions are lifted, unbelievably. So again, not only did we not achieve the president's goal of dismantling the program, we haven't achieved any of the other red lines. And by the way, let me say one other thing. I wish I'd made it a point at the last meeting. There is no practical need for any of this in Iran. They have one nuclear facility, one. They could buy enriched uranium so much cheaper, but instead they've created this elaborate elaborate process. So there's no practical need. Everybody agrees in the P5+1 they have no practical need for this program, so why are they doing it? Well, of course they're doing it to be a threshold nuclear country. That's what, I mean, nobody will dispute that. President Obama, if he were in here today, would tell you, of course, that's why they're doing it. So what we've gone through, I mean, some people have said, well, maybe we would allow them to have 500 centrifuges so they could develop medical isotopes, you know, so they could be, quote, proud of the nuclear program that they have. They're part of the cutting edge of what's happening around the world. But no, we're allowing them to have thousands of them. We're allowing them to continue research and development. And by the way, the IR-8s, we focused on all these 19,000 IR-1s that they have. They're like antiques. I was with somebody yesterday. The IR-8s are 24 times more powerful than the IR-1s. And we're allowing them to do research and development on those. In a room this size, if you had 30, you could hold 30 of them in a room that we're sitting in right now. So that would be the equivalent, if it's 24 times, 720 centrifuges, 720 centrifuges in a room this size if you compared it to an IR-1. You understand? And so all around Iraq, all around Iran, you're going to be able to have covert facilities that are going to be very difficult to upend. And again, if you read this document, and y'all can talk about it, I can't, because if y'all have read this AP story that identifies the inspection that's taking place in Parchin, which is just beyond belief. I mean, basically, we have signaled to Iran, maybe we're not really going to end up having inspectors in your military facilities like the Ayatollah has said. I mean, it's beginning to look like maybe what he was saying is true. Maybe there's some tacit understanding that getting into their military facilities with inspectors, which is what he specifically said, is going to be very difficult. So look, we haven't achieved any of the goals that have been explicitly laid out. And again, I just think that this is one of those legacy items. I think it's one of those things where you get involved. I think if you look at the motivations of our partners, you know, people wanting to do business, people wanting to sell arms, people wanting to buy oil. I just think we've ended up in a place that none of us ever imagined when this began we would be.
Shifting gears to domestic issues, you're in the minority on the vote to extend the highway funding bill. What's it going to take for Congress to actually get a long-term solution to our transportation problems?
Courage, common sense, leadership. I mean, look, it's an embarrassment to me. Both sides of the aisle on this issue have been incredibly irresponsible. And both sides of the aisle are more than willing to live in Pleasantsville and you throw future generations under the bus to look good to our constituents by passing a highway bill. It's always short term, so the state can't plan, the county governments can't plan, no one can. It's always short term and it's always unpaid for. So, Dwayne, you're a little younger than me. And, you know, so we have a political class in Washington right now on both sides of the aisle that are unwilling to address our fiscal issues. And our nation's greatness, because of that, continues to be tarnished because we're unwilling to address issues head on. To me, it's an embarrassment. I haven't voted for any of these. And I'm not gonna. I mean, we do things. I mean, this is almost, this year, we ended up with a short-term extension.
Right.
I think I was one of 4 votes against it. Again, it wasn't
91 to 4 or something
It wasn't
like that.
paid for, you know. Again, not paid for, not paid for. You know, people think, by the way, that my position has been I'm so interested in increasing user fees. My position has been threefold. Look, either get user fees coming in at the same rate the money's going out. That's one solution. Or spend the amount of money that's coming in. That's another solution. Just lower the amount, or devolve it back to the states. That's fine with me too. What my emphasis has been, and it's been almost it has been mischaracterized. Everybody's just focused on the one alternative.
The gas tax.
Yeah, I mean, my focus has been, look, guys, if we're going to do something like this, if infrastructure is important, let's pay for it. If it's not important, let's lower the amount of spending. But what we cannot do, and I was this way in 2006 when y'all were interviewing me when I was running. To me, conservative is if something's important enough to have, it's important enough to pay for. And both sides of the aisle right now, unfortunately, let's face it, I mean, what happens in Washington? You get elected and you're in the majority, so what's the number one goal? Stay in the majority. So both sides of the aisle end up kicking the can down the road on issues like this. I can't abide by it, I'm sorry. And I just can't support abject generational theft, which is especially on something like infrastructure that's like simple math, like a Davidson County 4th or 5th grader can kind of get it math-wise, and it's not like Medicare where you've got to do actuarial assumptions and you've got to understand demographic trends and you've got to understand delivery systems and all of that. Looks like he has all his fingers. Huh?
Still here.
Oh, you did? Okay. They were talking about some emergency that you may have had. We're glad you're here. But anyway, that to me has been the issue. It's the fiscal irresponsibility on this simple issue, which, by the way, is one of the few things that's actually in the Constitution that Congress is supposed to deal with.
Are you concerned about the state of the U.S. economy given the turmoil in the markets for the last few days, and concerned in any way about how a slowdown in the Chinese economy could be impacting us here? I
am. I just spoke. As a matter of fact, right before I came in, Dwayne, I checked, and let me give you an update here. The Dow's up today. But yeah, no, I get up. Look, I think we've known each other a long time. I wake up very early every morning, and I read numbers of publications from around the world and here. And yes, I'm very concerned. I spoke this morning at a international business IBC, I guess it is, at the chamber. And we have 4.5% of the world's population in America, but we have 22% of the world's GDP, and so. People here in Davidson County, our quality of life, our standard of living is closely tied to what's happening around the world. And by the way, that's why it matters to Americans that the world is secure and stable, right? But no, China's the second largest economy. We export lots of goods to them. They're going through a transition right now with the 1.2 or 3 billion people that they have. They're transitioning from a rural society to an urban society. It's a massive experiment dominated by the government there. And yes, I mean, Chinese slowdowns affect everything. It affects commodities, but certainly it affects exports. And yes, I mean, I'm just like everyone sitting at this table. I want the economy to do well. I want economy,
Is this a market reset, as some had said, or something more troubling to you?
Yeah, so, one of the things I've, always tried to do is to stick to my knitting. I'm not an economist. I'm not a financial manager. I mean, you can turn on CNBC or any other entity and read the, publications that deal with business, and you can get, 100 different opinions as to what's happening. And if I knew, then I'd obviously be much wealthier than I am today, I could predict. But just announced in the last 48 hours that their projection for growth in our own country is not 2.9% this next year, but 2%. Yes. Am I concerned that there's a slowdown in China because it affects America? Yes. And do I understand that a world that doesn't feel secure ends up over time not producing economically like it should? Yes. So look, we're in some trying times right now on multiple levels, and by the way, that's what makes it such a privilege to serve in the Senate.
I'm not sure if you had a chance to talk about affordable housing yet, but I had been talking to some folks who know you that when you were mayor, you had a very innovative affordable housing solution, and this is one of the biggest issues that is facing Davidson County today. And are there any things that we can learn from your experience there that would help Davidson County currently.
Yeah, thanks. I know we talked about this a little bit when we met over at Union Station, but you know, that's what brought me into public service, period. You know, I was a business guy in Chattanooga. My company was operating around the country. I became aware of a problem in Chattanooga, and that was we had, you know, thousands of people that didn't have decent housing. I thought I could do something about it as a volunteer, as a civic leader, and I led the creation of an entity called Chattanooga Neighborhood Enterprise, which ended up helping about 10,000 families in Chattanooga have decent, fit, and affordable housing. I got to know Mayor Purcell when I was Commissioner of Finance in the state, which happened after this. Actually, what happened, David, you know, because of my interest in solving this community problem, a governor, again, I had no interest in the public arena whatsoever. I never thought about running for public office, and there was a governor who was newly elected who asked me to serve on a task force to deal with housing at the state level, and then asked me to be on the THDA board. I became interested in public policy, ended up being Commissioner of Finance for our state under another governor. But I got to know Bill Purcell during that time. He was, obviously in the House. He ended up running for mayor. And I came over and spent some time with him and others when he was newly elected to focus on affordable housing. The only thing I can say about it, every community is different, but you've got to, first of all, it involved a good deal of charitable giving. I mean, we actually got people to help with their own resources. But it's an all of the above kind of thing. I mean, there just isn't a silver bullet. There's got to be a desire to solve the problem and then marshal all the resources that are available to you to deal with it in an effective way. And I would say one of the things that was important to me, and I think important to our success there, was, you know, we had people trying to push the notion of eliminating substandard housing. I don't think in Tennessee, and certainly I don't think in America, that when you say that government's going to eliminate something like that, I think the approach we took instead was better, and that was provide the opportunity for all Chattanoogans to live in decent, fit, and affordable housing. And my point is, when you deal with affordable housing, it's got to be a two-way street. I mean, you got to have, you've got to create opportunities for people, but people have got to be willing to take advantage of those opportunities and in a responsible way be a partner in making that happen. So I could get into all kind of details. I could give you the book that was written, to sort of lay out a plan to deal with this back in 1986. But in a city like Nashville that's having such tremendous success, and I get really excited every day when I scan the front page of the Tennessean and other papers just to see what's happening. I've never seen so much economic growth in Tennessee in my life. But with that, obviously, there are other issues that get created, and obviously housing costs are rising rapidly. It makes it difficult for people who are middle income and below to have housing, and there's got to be a will as a community to ensure that you're not going to crowd people out. You're not going to you're going to not cause them basically to live on the outskirts of town. And again, it takes it's challenging, but I know a community like Nashville with the type of people who live here can deal with it effectively.
Senator, a lot of reader questions centered, I noticed, around guns and safety. And of course, recently, locally, we've had our own scares, and news this morning, cameraman and a reporter shot dead in Virginia by a gunman. We don't know much about that. But what is your position and take on the fact that the U.S. has a higher criminal activity level regarding guns and innocence, and sort of the trend, at least we feel, is happening with the increase of rise of gun shooter incidents throughout the last few years? What is your take on policy regarding background checks or just gun handling at all? Just interested in your personal take.
Yeah, it was, I think, disappointing to every American that, down in Charleston, a person who shouldn't have had a weapon because of a background check, that the system that we put in place to make that happen failed, right? I mean, it just ended up being sloppy efforts on behalf of our, law enforcement agencies and things getting turned down. I mean, so 9 people died as a result of that. And so I know that most of these issues in the Senate are dealt with through the Judiciary Committee. I know that John Cornyn, has introduced a piece of legislation to try to be more clear about how background checks occur and to sort of do a carrot approach to encourage entities. What we have right now in our country is so many of the entities that are supposed to report problems with backgrounds are not doing it. I mean, it's just not making it into the data. And so more and more we're having issues like this occur. So, which is disheartening. Secondly, I mean, this is not something people want to talk about much because it's so hard. The issue David brought up, that's a tough issue. It's going to take, years of dedicated effort to deal with it, just like it's going to take years of dedicated effort to deal with some of the transportation issues that are being created here with all the growth. It's exciting to see, but other things have to be, and that takes years of concentrated focus. We have a massive problem in our country with the mental health system. It's just, it's sad. Our sheriff, we've had some incidences occur that, that I can't talk about that have caused Todd and I in particular to sit down and talk with our sheriff about a couple of things in Chattanooga. And, a huge portion of the population that we have in our county jail, huge, are people that are mentally ill. I mean, that's not where, so, we haven't, spent the time and effort to make sure that our mental health system is functioning properly. Many of these people end up in places they're not supposed to be, or, by the way, untreated. Much of what you're seeing happen is happening by people that certainly are going through emotional problems. And then I'll just add to it, one of the new issues that we're going to be dealing with is just this whole issue of despondent young people who identify with what ISIS is doing, both religiously, but they identify they don't have a wife, they don't have a job, and ISIS through social media is able to attract them. And if you've seen some of the publications, the propaganda, the things that ISIS does to create such glamour about the things that they're doing and what happens when you join with them. Another phenomenon we're going to be dealing with in our country is people who maybe don't have the ability to go join ISIS because that's what they wish to do, but instead will create havoc in our own country in similar ways. So these are troubling times, and one of the problems that we have relative to this is, first of all, I think many people who've carried the flag of libertarianism, okay, if that's a word, I think have misrepresented to the American people what our NSA has been doing. Okay, and I think it's a travesty that the American people have thought, for instance, on our bulk program relative to telephones, that we were listening in on phones. I mean, I'm sorry, that just wasn't happening. Those tools were effective in getting the leaders of organizations. Very effective. And I was discouraged by the fact that we passed legislation, again, Dwayne, I was one of a few votes against it, that I thought weakened our ability to protect America. In the name, by the way, of people, civil liberties, which I'm sorry, people were stretching the truth, exaggerating, making things up, in my opinion. With this other issue, unfortunately, it's happening at the social media level. And we have almost no ability. I mean, we're talking about lone wolves that we have no suspicion are doing anything. They're kind of underneath all of this. And again, that's a phenomenon that that as a nation, in addition to these other issues, is going to be something we're going to continue to grapple with that, again, is going to create fear among the American people.
So it would seem to me that, and you're not talking about the guns themselves, you're talking about the social issues, the mental health issues, the things underneath that. Do we as a society have to rethink some things about those types of folks who are left out of the economy, left out of we talked about the despondent young people without a wife, without a job kind of thing. Do we have to rethink some of our systems along with the mental health systems in this new era, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, are you talking, when you say, I'm not sure, I want to make sure I'm answering the right question.
Well, you know, a lot of people go to the strategy that this is about guns and we're too ready and we're too gun happy in this country, and you compare it to other countries and we're all about guns, and in the South that's a big point topic. When you address the answer to the question, you talked a lot about the mental health systems and one with the social media pieces aspect. So are we chasing the wrong things?
Yeah, well, here's what happens. I mean, every time there's an incident, and I know this isn't what you were doing, you were raising a question that was asked, but every time there's an incident, then we politicize this whole gun issue. We do, I'm sorry. I mean, it's just what happens. And then, there's all kinds of discussions about, background checks and, quote, gun control and that kind of thing, when really, I would say that hasn't been the problem. I mean, we have a system. In Charleston, again, it wasn't adhered to, and so that occurred. I don't know what has been said about the Chattanooga incident publicly. I know what I know privately, and I can assure you that was not a gun control issue, okay? That was another entire issue, unrelated to background checks or anything else. So, yes, I mean, I think that we are, in many cases, we try to politicize it, and people on one side push, and people on the other side push. We've got a lot of societal issues that need to be dealt with. And the most major, by far, and we said this during the Toomey Mansion debate, after what happened in the Northeast with the school children, the biggest is the mental health system, and the fact that we're not appropriately dealing with that issue. Not only we're not dealing with the issue, we're not reporting properly when people are mentally ill and who are not supposed to get weapons do. So, yes, I think in many cases, it's what we do in America. I mean, it's what we do in Washington. Instead of to Dave's question, instead of doing the hard work that it takes to address the real problem, we want to superficially get in a debate about something that really causes no real commitment, no real discipline by either side. It's a great rhetorical debate. It's a great way to divide the country. It's a great way to get people on your side supporting you and people on their side supporting them, but it doesn't address the issue.
I'm wondering on a foreign policy issue, I'm sorry, as I've been reading a lot of publications abroad, there's a perception that the Obama administration's foreign policy is incoherent. That is, it's inconsistent, it's reactive. Yeah. And I'm wondering to get your assessment of that, whether or not you find that to be true, and how would you like to reset that, either for the end of the Obama administration or for the next president?
Yeah, well, I don't think there's, you missed a part of this, but Dwayne asked me, what are many of the moderate Democrats that are calling me right now about the Iran deal, what is the question that they're raising? And it is that question, that we don't have a policy relative to the Middle East. And they're concerned. I mean, the administration on one hand is wearing them out to support this deal, and we're hearing all kinds of threats being made if they don't and that kind of thing. On the other hand, they're sitting there saying, well, but we don't really have any policy. So look, this has been bipartisan frustration. No policy in Syria. I'm sorry. We talked about some red lines on the Iran deal. Assad clearly crossed a red line in August of 2013, and this sounds overly pejorative, I know, but we jumped in Russia and Iran's lap to get out from under that. I mean, I'm sorry, we did, and now, by the way, those same chemical weapons that were supposed to be out of the country, they're being used against populations inside the country by ISIS. And so yeah, there's just been, it's been a policy of no policy. I mean, the president has, I talk to people, you know, we all talk with each other. I mean, people act like, I mean, I think some people have the perception that Republicans and Democrats don't talk to each other. That's totally untrue. But we know decision memo after decision memo after decision memo has made it to the president's desk on issue after issue after issue. And they sit there. They just sit there. And so, again, I think that's why there was such a drive on this Iran issue to create, quote, a legacy, a foreign policy success, quote, 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 and because there just haven't been. I mean, for instance, I mean, I'll turn the question around and ask you, name a foreign policy success in the last 6.5 years. Name one.
Trade promotion, and to a degree, we talked about that before, but again, that's a question of whether it's military force
Yeah.
or whether it's a question that's pushed by
Yeah,
Congress.
yeah.
And that-
So look, I strongly supported Trade Promotion Authority.
Mhm.
Let's face it, it was my side of the aisle that got Trade Promotion Authority across, you know, and it is a great example of, you know, using diplomacy and using economic issues to solve, you know, I was in Southeast Asia a year ago this time and saw what was happening with China dominating the region. I think I've been in here since that time, I think, to talk about that. It's so, getting to a TPP agreement is very, very important to us foreign policy. And we haven't achieved that yet. I mean, TPA gives the president the power to fast track it. Now we've got to have a deal, right? And I know the last round was, you know, didn't achieve the results. I hope that that is going to happen. And if it does, by the way, I'll check that off as a foreign policy accomplishment. But up until this point in time, I mean, all that did was give the power for him to do it. Name one foreign policy achievement. I cannot think of one.
You don't think that the administration's killing of Osama bin Laden was a foreign policy achievement?
No, I mean, I was glad that it happened, but I mean, have you seen any diminution of terrorist activities?
You don't think
I mean,
that's changed the region, or that's changed?
No. I mean, you can't kill an individual and change. No, I think it was great that it occurred, and you know, I'm indebted, as all Americans are, to SEAL Team 6. You know, for the. But I don't look at the killing of a terrorist when, by the way, and then to say that you decimated Al Qaeda. I mean, I don't think anybody believes that. I mean, to me, if we had decimated Al Qaeda, that would have been a foreign policy. That certainly hasn't occurred. But I applaud the efforts of the individuals who took out Osama bin Laden, and I appreciate the president making you know, the choice to go after it and do it. But I go after him and do it. But I don't look at that as a quote big picture foreign policy achievement.
Can you tell us what the next few months look like for you and what your top 2
Yeah.
or 3 goals are in the coming year?
So, you know, for me, we're going to have this debate when we get back. My goal there is to have a sober, substantive debate and vote. And I think we'll achieve that. I realize I can read the tea leaves and understand that at this moment it looks very unlikely that we'll have a veto-proof majority to disapprove. But I know we're going to have a bipartisan majority that will disapprove. So the next round will be, after that, will be to achieve to pass some piece of legislation follow-on that begins to articulate and push forth you know, a foreign policy initiative in the Middle East. And I think many of the Democrats that, you know, end up voting for this are going to be wanting to latch themselves onto something that, you know, says, yeah, I did this, but, you know, I want to see this happen. So this is a goal that I'm unlikely to achieve, this next one, but, you know, I'd love to see us approach the infrastructure funding and in the same way that Tennesseans do things, and that is, you know, we actually pay for things as we go, and By the way, what Tennessee does is if it doesn't have the money, it spends less, right? I mean, but you know, I'm afraid that what we'll do in Washington is another gimmicky, kick the can down the road non-solution. That'll probably happen sometime between now and year end. You know, there'll be some minor regulatory issues that we'll deal with probably on banking that will be of benefit to Tennessee community bankers that have been sort of swept up and overwhelmed by the regulatory regime that has taken place, which all was very predictable. And I think, you know, I said at this conference table at the time what was going to happen. So many people, this is one of the fallacies that I find so much in public policy. The administration at the time was able to convince the community banks that if they joined them in going after the big guys, that they would be held harmless. And I tried to tell them at the time that's just not the way it works. It's not going to work out very well for you. That's not a good plan. So what's happened is, over time, those same things that were intended to go after J.P. Morgan, you know, let's get the big guys, let's get the big guys. You know, we've developed this sort of mentality in America. It's okay to get the big guys. But what happens is all those regulatory regimes, they end up trickling downstream, and they end up becoming, you know, things that many of our community bankers have to deal with. I don't like that, and I know that it's harmed. Especially, you know, in a city like Nashville, you've got, you know, every major bank in the country operates here or has associations here. But to get outside of a place like Nashville into, you know, more rural areas, and it's the community bankers that go to the Rotary Club, the Kiwanis Club, the Lions Club, the, you know, Chamber of Commerce. Those are the folks that drive the community development that's taking place there. And what's happened is they've been swept up. They don't have the back office. You know, they've got a small asset base, so the people they add to deal with the regulatory piece increases their cost structure. They now have been put into credit boxes. I think y'all know this. It used to be, when you borrowed money, it was the 3 C's, right? Character, character, character. And, you know, I remember, you know, I borrowed $5,000 once when I was, you know, a young business guy, and the guy looked at me, looked at my financial statement, and said, you know, Corker, I'm going to loan you this money because you have a clean, trim mustache and a big smile because you don't have anything else. And, you know, you used to be able to make loans that way, and today, I'm sorry, you're in a credit box, and, you know, you can't do it anymore, and it hurts. I mean, it really does. It's difficult for starting businesses, small businesses without an asset base and, you know, a flow of income to get loans. So I think we're going to do some things. I think this year there may be some legislation that will pass to alleviate some of the burdens that they have.
Just one more question?
You were named one of Time's 100 most influential people this year. Could you tell us who are the most influential people in your life and why?
Most influential people in my life. Obviously my immediate family now, but, you know, I think you're referring to impressionable growing up. Yeah, there was a coach at my public high school that had obviously my dad had a big impact on me, my mother had a big impact on me. But outside, I just off the cuff, I haven't had this kind of question asked in a long, long time, maybe never. There were 2 people that had a huge impact on me. There was a coach, you know, played sports in high school like a lot of people do, and there was a coach that spent just an inordinate amount of time with all of us at this big public school in downtown Chattanooga. That no doubt, from the standpoint of just setting an example and, you know, good sportsmanship, hard work, discipline. You know, the guy wouldn't let us drink Cokes, wouldn't let us drink Sprites. I mean, that was a violation of, I mean, so, you know, it's still discipline, hard work. Another guy that had an incredible impact on me was, I met this coal miner when I was about a sophomore in college. And he had done really well, obviously starting from the ground up. and he created a very successful company. His son was a friend of mine at UT, and I spent a weekend with him, and I realized that you could be, I had never really been around, just to be honest, wealthy people in this regard. I grew up in a middle-class family. My dad worked at DuPont. And sitting there, I guess I spent maybe 3 days with this guy on a trip, and he was such a generous, kind person. And I was aware of all the things that he had done to help other people, mostly in a very quiet way. And I think it was that weekend that I realized that I want to start my own company. And I think it'd be such a great thing to create a company that was profitable, and to have the kind of impact that he's had. He was from West Virginia, a more rural area, but to do that, to be a business guy, to take a risk, to create a company, and to use that success to affect other people's lives. And I don't know that I would have at age 25 with $8,000 had the vision to start my own company and do what I did with the help of a lot of people had I not met him. So huge impact, huge impact.
Thank you very much, Senator
Yeah.
Corker. I apologize for being late again.
No.
I think I had a good excuse, but thank you very much again to all of you.
Thank y'all for setting this up. Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.